All right, let's talk a little bit about writing two-part thesis statements. Thesis statements that go beyond the normal one-sentence restriction while still technically obeying the one-sentence restriction. How do they do that? They use a semicolon to connect both parts of the thesis. Why would you need to do this? Well, there are several reasons. One might be that topic requires you to answer two questions. In fact, in many of my classes right now, this is the exact issue you're dealing with. If the topic is perhaps asking you what the main idea of a text is and then how it relates to society today, you can use a semicolon to connect both of those thesis portions, right? This is a two-question topic statement, so you're probably going to have to write a thesis that addresses both of those questions. Might not be necessary in all cases of a two-part essay topic, but certainly it's helpful to have the option of writing a two-part thesis rather than trying to restrict yourself just to a one-part thesis. You might also want to emphasize two relating portions of your argument. It's possible that an essay topic wants you to take a look maybe at a misconception about a text. So you can make an argument in the first half about this misconception, and then the second half about your correction or your argument that that is the wrong way to interpret something. That's also a good way to point out cause and effect, maybe in some nonfiction analysis, or if then in nonfiction analysis, if this were to happen, then this will happen. If we continue to do X, blah, blah, blah argument, the future of X looks like Y. That's your second part of your thesis. You might also want to address two significant texts. You might have to make an argument that synthesizes information across two different texts. That might require you to do a two-part thesis too, one to talk about one text, one to talk about the other. Or you might just want to talk a lot in your thesis. That's okay too. Thesis statements should be one sentence, right? But if your sentence winds up having a lot of conjunctions and runs forever and ever and ever, and you've got prepositional phrases hanging off of both ends, maybe it's better if you can condense it a little bit and just make it a two-part thesis, and you get two independent clauses to work with instead of just one giant rambling sentence. Before we go any further, we have to... I'll blink my webcam out here so you can see it. Wow, we've got pop-up windows everywhere. Well, I'm sure you understood the gist. Okay, what is a semicolon? Before we continue any further, we must make sure that we're on the same page about what a semicolon does and how to grammatically use it. A semicolon is something that shows a close relationship between two independent clauses. Independent clauses are their own grammatically complete sentences. They can have conjunctions in them. They can have prepositional phrases in them. You can throw in a positive phrase in them, whatever. But they both have to be grammatically complete sentences. So an incorrect way to use a semicolon would be, the snow is piled up all around us. Well, that's a complete sentence. Semicolon, driveway covered. Driveway covered is not a complete sentence. There's no verb. But the right way to do that would be, the snow is piled up all around us, semicolon, to show that it's a close relationship. The driveway is covered. Now you've got two complete independent clauses. They could both be their own sentence, but you decided that they're too similar to each other. They're too close in idea to be their own independent sentences, so you've thrown a semicolon between them. And now it's clear to your reader that both of these thoughts go together. You can see that even my definition of a semicolon utilizes a semicolon correctly to show relationship between the sentences. Now, it is kind of a workaround. In a thesis statement, we use these semicolons to show obviously both sides of our argument are going to be related to each other, but we can use a semicolon to show that both of these things are part of a thesis statement. It just didn't all fit into one sentence. Next. Okay, so here's an example of what this might look like if you're addressing an essay topic. This is about number 12 looks just like you because it's something that we're all familiar with from the beginning of the year. What warning does number 12 look just like you contain about the future? Okay, well that's essay topic number 1. And then the essay topic question is also asking you to talk about how society has listened to this warning. So you've got two questions embedded into your topic question. How are you going to write a thesis statement that addresses both questions while still being concise, while still arguing for a point, while being one sentence? Well, chances are you're going to use a semicolon. So this would be our first part. Number 12 warns against the vapid pursuit of impossible beauty standards and predicts that artificial happiness eats away at the soul of society. There's a lot to argue in here, right? A thesis statement has to be an argument too. So this thesis statement, I'm telling the reader that they're going to see something about what vapid pursuit of impossible beauty standards. I'm going to have to clarify what that means later in the essay, talking about, how this artificial happiness that comes from this pursuit is going to eventually destroy the soul of society. I can use evidence from the TV show about how no one in that society is aware that they are being manipulated, how the people in the society have abandoned literature and abandoned critical thinking. Talk about Marilyn's father. There's so many different things from the text that can support this, and now I've given myself a useful roadmap that I can use later on and refer back to. However, I haven't addressed anywhere in this statement the second part of the essay topic. Has society listened to this warning? So that's a 50% now. I'm 50% of the way there. Well, I've thrown a semicolon in so I can finish my thesis statement. Along with the disturbing rise of teen depression and suicide, I skipped ahead. A close examination of Instagram culture, now I'm talking about today, now I'm talking about contemporary society, along with the disturbing rise of teen depression and suicide, proves the warning to be true. Now I've taken the first half of the essay topic and the second half, and I've combined them into one two-part thesis statement, one compound thesis statement. Notice how both sides are complete sentences. Both sides make a similar argument. They're both very closely related to each other. One leads very naturally into the other. But if I were to try to put this all into one sentence, it would probably sound a little clunky. As it is, it's a little wordy. It's long for a sentence. But sometimes your thesis statement is going to have to argue so much, it's going to have to cover so much ground that a two-part thesis statement is going to be the only way you can actually get there. All right, let's take a look at one more. Is Friar Lawrence responsible for Romeo and Juliet's deaths? We're talking about Romeo and Juliet. We're just taking a rewind to last year for a second. So this is asking just one question, but I think that there's too much going on for my interpretation of Romeo and Juliet. I think there's too much going on here for me to answer it in one simple sentence. So I've got to break my answer into two. I've got to take two different parts of this question. I've got to take what the question is actually asking, and then what I'm going to argue is my interpretation of the text, and I'm going to push them together into one compound thesis statement. Though Friar Lawrence botches the plan that leads to the misunderstanding between the two lovers, which he does, he's not very good at his job there, delivering that letter. Their love was doomed from the very first scene of the play. Okay, that's my argument. I'm answering the question. I have made my thesis statement. I've made my argument. I could stop there, but I don't give myself a ton of useful argument to refer back to in the rest of the essay. What can I do here? Well, I can talk about how Friar Lawrence botches the plan, but that's not really contributing to my argument, right? My argument is that their love is doomed from the very first scene of the play. So spending my whole essay talking about Friar Lawrence doing the wrong thing isn't really going to contribute back to my thesis statement. So I've added in a second part. It was their fate to die for each other, and no amount of planning, successful or otherwise, would have prevented their deaths. Well, now I've given myself a lot more to talk about for the rest of my essay. Now this feels more like a natural jumping off point for my body paragraphs as I continue on. Now I can talk about a few things, right? I can talk about the very first scene of the play. I can talk about how it was their fate to die for each other. I can talk about how every plan they would have made would have failed, how Friar Lawrence might not be the only weak point in the plan. The plan was full of holes, if we remember correctly. It just so happens that he's the one who messes up. But their plans could have been messed up at any point because it doesn't matter what they planned to do. They were star-crossed lovers. They were going to die, as we learn in scene 0. So I've used a compound thesis statement here to give me adequate argument in order to continue the rest of my essay and not get stuck at any point. All right, there are a few important takeaways before you try writing your own. Unfortunately, I can't flip my webcam spot, so I'm just going to get rid of it. Okay. Your thesis statement is going to be longer, but it should still be concise. A thesis statement shouldn't wind up looking like a paragraph. Those thesis statements look pretty long because they are in very large font, but I promise you, if you were writing those out in a regular essay format, size 12, double space, they wouldn't take up that much space. You still need an intro paragraph. Your thesis statement is just the end of your intro paragraph. So make sure it's concise and make sure that only the necessary words to prove your point are in there. Speaking of intro paragraphs, background information still goes in the paragraph before the thesis statement. Notice I didn't explain what happens in number 12 looks just like you. I didn't talk at all about Instagram. I'm expecting the reader either to know this in advance or, better yet, to talk about that in my background information section of my intro paragraph. That's still very important. Even if your thesis is a little bit longer, it doesn't mean you get to skip background information. So you've got to tell them, who Friar Lawrence is, what happens to Romeo and Juliet at the end of the play. We've got to know this stuff before you get to the thesis statement. So that is why that has not been included in these examples. Thesis statements are arguments. You have to be making a statement about your position, and you have to be prepared to back it up. A thesis statement cannot simply state the fact of the matter. This gets a little, not even dicey. This can be hard to discern when something like the statement about Romeo and Juliet, well, that does seem very factual, doesn't it? Aren't they destined to die for each other? But don't forget, that is an argument about the text, right? That is an interpretation of the text, and it can be backed up with evidence from the play. Your name is at the top of the paper. I know it's you. Don't use the first person. Don't use it. Doesn't belong in your thesis. Doesn't belong in your background information. Doesn't belong in your body paragraphs. I know who it is because you are the person who turned in the paper. I imagine that when you're writing a statement about your position, you are writing about your own position. So you don't need your name in there anywhere. You don't need I in there anywhere. You don't need us. Leave it out. And that is it. Now, I hope you feel a little more comfortable in writing a two-part thesis, and I hope that you can refer back to these examples or watch this video again if you get stuck while you're writing one. Goodbye.